Hello and welcome to Hotspot, a Swedish podcast and YouTube channel that touches current topics and ideas that shape our time. In today's program, I would speak to Coleman Hughes, an American writer, podcast host, and visiting professor at the University of Austin. Coleman addresses the contentious race issues in his debates and lately through his book, The End of Race Politics, Arguments for a Colorblind America. Coleman is now visiting Sweden for the annual book fair, where we promote his latest book, which is translated to Swedish. We'll talk about the race politics in America and also touch what's happening in Europe. Welcome to enjoy our interesting conversation. Welcome to Hotspot, Coleman Hughes.
Great to be here.
Welcome to Sweden. You're here to promote your new book.
Yep.
You're going to be at the book fair in Göteborg. We're a small country, so we have like one book fair per year and everybody's there. And you have this book called The End of Race Politics.
Yes, The End of Race Politics, Arguments for a Colorblind America.
Yes, and it's now translated to Swedish as well. And you can order that book at nordpolar.se. So this book speaks about the race politics, the latest year of critical race theory and so on. Here in Sweden, we don't have the same history as you in America, but it's like we have imported the ideas from the American universities. So we have the same topics, we have almost the same discussion, even if it's not exactly the same. So I think that what we're talking about will have a lot of relevance to Europe and Sweden. But I'm thinking, when you are arguing, when I'm listening to you, you speak in that idea of the civil rights movement from the 1960s and what Martin Luther King Jr. said. I mean, on the march on Washington 1963, he said, I'm looking forward to the when my 4 children will live in a nation where they will be judged not by the color of the skin, but the content of their character. What happened to where we are today, where you have affirmative action, where you have all kinds of DEI hires, and what happened in between that and where we are today?
Yeah, so as you said, the civil rights movement was premised on the idea of color blindness, meaning not that I pretend I don't notice your race. Like, obviously you can tell I'm not a Chinese woman, right? So it's not pretending not to notice, it's saying, I'm not going to treat you any differently because of your race. I'm going to ask you not to treat me any differently because of my race, and we're both going to ask the government not to treat us any differently based on our race. That's what the civil rights movement was all about. Now, how did we get from that to affirmative action? Now, that's a very interesting story. What actually happened is 1964 and 65 in America, we passed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. With those 2 bills, you got rid of Jim Crow and white supremacy. Black people in the South could now vote. These were great accomplishments. Immediately after that, starting in 1965, 66, and 67, all the cities in the north of America, cities like Detroit and Newark, not where there had been Jim Crow, but talking about in the north, start erupting in flames and riots of the kind we didn't see again in America until the 90s and then 2020. Devastating riots that you can still see the legacy of those riots today if you go to those cities. And what happened is a lot of people, politicians and people around the country said, what's happening? I thought we just fixed the race problem. How come African Americans are rioting in all these northern cities? And there were many reasons for it, but what happened is it led politicians to hasty solutions. Like, okay, if black people are rioting up north, well, I've got to do something, right? So I'm going to hire a black police chief. I'm going to, hire more black police officers. I'm going to specifically hire people as a result of their racial identity. And then that idea made it to the Richard Nixon administration, and he was the first president to institute the policy of, if you're a company doing business with the federal government, you have to have 12% of your workers have to be black. That was called the Philadelphia Plan in the late 1960s. That was the first real affirmative action. And then from then, it made its way all throughout society. Excuse me. So that's how we first got affirmative action. Those policies were not originated in the civil rights movement. They were originated in that phenomenon just after the civil rights movement. But they became the norm throughout American society to the point where in college admissions until very recently, it was legal and widely practiced to give a black applicant an extra, basically the equivalent of an extra 400 points on the SAT, on our national exam, as compared to, say, an Asian student, right? So there are just, thousands of kids applying to college that get in or not based on their race. And this is it's just racial discrimination, right? And so the way we got here is that there was a movement called critical race theory in the 1970s and 80s, and their argument was that the civil rights movement did not go far enough. Martin Luther King, they said, was good, but he got it wrong. Color blindness is not the solution. Actually, the solution is to uproot the entire civilization and start over again, because racism is so deeply embedded that the whole tree is poisoned. You have to cut it out from the roots and plant a new tree, as it were. This was the critical race theory argument. It didn't get very far until about 2012. What changed in 2012? 2012, we had elected Barack Obama. Race relations were the best they have ever been in American history. And that the polls actually show that as a fact. And then something went terribly wrong. The question is what? What happened is that social media and smartphones changed everything. Now, why did they change everything? They changed everything because in America we have a problem that Europe doesn't, which is that we have a lot of gun crime. We've had that for a very long time, which means that our cops are a lot more fearful of guns when they approach suspects. In America, a police officer gets shot almost every day, if you look at the whole country. So in America, when a cop pulls over a suspect and that suspect reaches into his pocket to get a phone or a wallet, the cop is afraid it's a gun. That's not a reality in a lot of other places in many European countries. So every year there are about usually less than 100 cases of unarmed Americans that get shot and killed by cops. We have very good data on this now, and the data show that about half of those people are white in every year. You just never hear about it because those cases don't really make the national media. But here's what happened around 2012 is that before that, if a cop shoots an unarmed American, maybe it makes the local news, maybe it makes the local newspaper, a journalist writes a story about it, but it never makes the New York Times, the LA Times, Washington Post, CNN, Fox News. After 2012, what happens? That same thing happens. Someone pulls out their phone halfway through, which means they miss the first half, so they miss the context of the arrest. They post that on social media to Facebook, where it can get millions of views in a matter of hours. And then the algorithm will show it to the people that are most angered by it, because that's how the algorithms on social media work. So this completely changes how information spreads, and it leads people, it was a shock to the American public, because race relations had never been better. People were saying, hold on, I thought we had made massive strides against racism, but all of a sudden now I'm seeing videos of white cops shooting unarmed black suspects. And I'm not seeing videos of white suspects being killed. Now, the videos actually did exist. They just didn't make the rounds on social media. So people went looking for explanations. And this is when the critical race theory comes back, because that had just been a philosophy for, grad students. But then the critical race theorists came and they said, we've been talking about this for 50 years. We've been telling you, just because the civil rights movement happened, just because we can vote, just because we elected Obama, doesn't mean we're not still a white supremacist country. This country is founded on white supremacy, they say. And in the context of all these people seeing all these videos, which were misleading, painted a misleading narrative, they said, okay, maybe these critical race theory folks have a point. And that's when you start seeing words like systemic racism, institutional racism, white privilege, whiteness, and all this stuff pervade the culture. And that's how we got neo-racism and wokeness and all the rest.
So social media popularized these fringe academics who were doing these critical race theory ideas that actually nobody knew about before.
Yes.
Wow. When we go back to the civil rights movement, I mean, that was the mainstream idea of colorblindness and to be equally treated as a person of color. There was another group, and that was the Black Power group, who were more aggressive. They even armed themselves. They were more separatistic. They wanted the black people to separate in old communities. Would you say, if you take just a shot of this moment right now, that they have been now more successful than actually the civil rights movement?
So the civil rights movement was definitely more successful in actually changing the landscape of the country. It was the civil rights movement that achieved voting rights for African Americans and integration as opposed to segregation. So the Black Power movement and eventually BLM, which is kind of the grandchild of the Black Power movement, they have no comparable achievements legislatively to point to. Though you could say in some way that the Black Power movement and the rhetoric of Black Power won the culture in a way, meaning that, I probably, walking around New York City, I'm probably more likely to see someone with a T-shirt that says BLM or something Black Power-ish than I am likely to see someone with a T-shirt of Martin Luther King's face. So, yeah, you might argue that they won the culture, but they didn't actually win any tangible outcomes for African Americans as a community. At least it's hard to say. And in fact, the consequences of BLM for the black community were pretty terrible. And I'll give just one example. In 2020, the year that BLM was at its height, the murder rate in America went up more in a single year than it has in the entire history of the country. In other words, the year-over-year spike was the highest spike we've ever seen. The most drastic spike we've ever seen. And that was not born equally by all communities. That was born more in black communities and inner city and poor communities than it was where, the people defending BLM at the New York Times live, So that was a direct consequence of the anti-police policy and general feeling of the moment. It was not an accident. And so I would challenge anyone to point me to a benefit that the Black Lives Matter movement caused, which could possibly approach equality with the negative of having the biggest spike in murder year over year in American history.
What is the condition of the BLM today? I mean, it started in 2020. It started before, but 2020 20 with when George Floyd died, it really took off. How are people looking at BLM today? Is it still popular? I mean, of course, it's abated in popularity, but is it still a force to reckon with in America?
No, I don't think so. I think it's over. BLM was never an effective organization. The leaders were basically incompetent and mediocre, but they came up with an incredibly good slogan. That's about all they did, though. Besides one of the co-founders of BLM, who took in millions in donations and then used it to buy houses and go on private jet flights, and that's a whole nother story. The point is, it was never actually a real effective political organization. It was just a really catchy slogan that captured the feeling of a moment. And it was decentralized, and so once that mood is gone, which it is gone, once it's no longer cool, like every idea has its day and then it's old, right? It's cool for the kids to do it, but then the next generation of kids remembers it as that's something you old people did. And so BLM is already in that phase of its life cycle.
When this happened, there was a lot of authors and thinkers that became very popular. Ibram X. Kendi, we had Robin DiAngelo, and so on. They became very popular. I'm going to read you a quote from Ibram X. Kendi and see what you react on it, because I think it's some way encapsulates how they think in this movement. It says, "The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination." And it says later on in that quote, "In order to treat some person equally, we must treat them differently." What is your thought about the core of this kind of thinking?
Well, he says it right there. I mean, his recipe for society is a recipe for endless discrimination. I mean, it's actually, consider what he's saying. What he's saying is people have been discriminated against in the past, true. Therefore, we need to discriminate in the opposite direction in the present. But when we discriminate in the opposite direction in the present, that will create new victims of discrimination, which we will then have to correct for in the future with more discrimination. It's literally a recipe for endless grievances. And the logic of the civil rights movement and the colorblind principle is that if we've got multiple races, multiple ethnicities that are living in the same country, and we're all citizens, and we have to live together, we have to get along, because this is our country. What are the other options? I mean, we're not going to partition, right? So we've got to get along for the sake of all of us. The only way that we can do that is by calling a truce and saying, we're not going to allow the government to discriminate against anyone, because when we go down that road, we're never going to agree on which policies are the good ones and which policies we're always going to disagree, because by definition, the people getting discriminated against, they're never going to agree that it's fair. It's human nature. And so isn't it wiser to just take this power away from the government and say the government has to treat you as an individual, and if the government wants to implement a policy to help people, to give someone a helping hand, okay, do that. But do that on the basis of income and socioeconomics and class. If you want to help poor people because they're poor, that's good, that's okay. But don't say, okay, we're going to give black people a leg up in a zero-sum game. By definition, that means keeping white people down or keeping Asians down. This is the whole reason that African Americans in America have such a bitter memory of Jim Crow is because we were discriminated against. How can we then turn around and say to people who weren't even alive then, I'm sorry you didn't get into the college of your choosing. We had to experience that. We couldn't go to these fancy colleges for 100 years. But I'm sorry you didn't get in because of your skin color. But if you're upset about it, screw you, who cares? It's totally hypocritical. And so the healthy recipe for a multi-ethnic, multiracial society is to embody the colorblind principle and and treat everyone equally.
I'm thinking about if we just hold on a little bit still to the civil rights movement. I mean, Martin Luther King was a pastor, he was a Christian. He had that foundational thought of reconciliation, to not how tackle injustice with vengeance or new oppression, but reconciliation. While you many times call these kind of studies also grievance studies, that you pull from that feeling of grievance, which creates a cycle of revenge and giving back. And that force, we don't have the same kind of force today as of that time of reconciliation, and Martin Luther King who goes there and has these non-violence marches. What do you think about that, the foundational attitude towards the people that you feel have done you injustice?
Yes, well, Martin Luther King was a Christian, and his Christianity was an important part of his appeal to Americans. He was able to say that in Christ there is neither Greek nor Jew, neither slave nor free. And that ethic was able to resonate with a lot of Americans that would not otherwise have been disposed to agree with him. Part of the problem is nowadays is, because American society is more fractured and more secular, I'm not sure there is a secular equivalent that is powerful and really hits people in as hard a way. You can say treat everyone the same, and I think people understand that, but maybe that's not quite as effective as telling a Christian country, reminding a Christian country what Jesus said. So that's one worry. But yeah, there's no doubt that Dr. King's Christianity was an important part of not only his own philosophy, but also his ability to persuade the American public.
What do you think will happen now, because there's positive treatment of people of minorities? What will happen? Will that create a backlash among the white people who don't have the same accessibility to universities, media coverage? I saw there was a very strong reaction to this Ukrainian girl who was killed on the bus, Irina something her name was. And do you think that will create the feeling of resentment that maybe many black people felt in the 60s and 70s, but now from the other side? Can you see those kind of feelings? Or do you think there's still hope that we can correct this kind of path we are going downward towards?
Yeah, the resentment has already started. The Ukrainian girl that was stabbed is a great example. So here's the context that a Swedish audience might not know, but I think will relate to, given your guys' challenges that you face. For years and years and years, the mainstream media in America would love if there was a story of a white person killing a black person. They would cover it wall to wall, and they didn't care about if it was the reverse. I'll give you a perfect example. I think it was 2018, a young girl named Jasmine Barnes was killed. She was like 7 years old. It was tragic. I think it was in Houston, Texas. Black girl. She was killed, and someone saw a white man driving in a truck, driving away from the scene. They thought maybe this white guy is the murderer. We had no evidence yet, but he was a suspect. Bam, the New York Times is covering it, right? No evidence it was a hate crime yet, but people are saying it's a hate crime with literally no evidence. The New York Times covers this story every day for a week. Congress people are talking about it. People are raising money for the family of this victim of a hate crime. Come to find out, they actually catch the guy. It was a black guy. It was just another routine black on black gangland violence situation. This guy was in a gang. He was trying to shoot at a rival gang, and he clipped a young child in the process. It happens all the time in America. It's very sad, but it happens all the time. New York Times doesn't care, right? That happens dozens of times a year. You'll never see it covered in a New York Times article. But they thought it was a white guy, so they covered it every single day, right? So this was the status quo of American mainstream media outlets for years. Now, and it was also this, and Twitter was also controlled mostly by people that leaned left. Now Elon Musk comes along and buys Twitter, turns it to X, takes off all of the guardrails and the censorship and the thumb on the scale policies that they had, content moderation, and just lets the floodgates loose with people that are a mixture of actual racists and also people that have just been frustrated at what they see as the obvious racial bias of the mainstream media. And of course, most Democrats didn't even think it was biased because it was their values, right? Ideology, it's like bad breath. If you have it, you don't notice. If other people have it, you notice. So this Ukrainian girl comes along, gets stabbed by this black guy, and now all the people on Twitter are doing the same thing, right? They care about this because it's a black person killing a white person. And so at the same time that you can say, I don't think we should be caring about murders more or less because of the race of the victim or the race of the perpetrator. A murder is a murder. It's a terrible thing, and we should care about it on the basis of that alone, not on the basis of race.
You think this is a reaction more to the lack of media coverage and say, we know, as you mentioned here, if it was the opposite, it would be a coverage. Now it's not coverage. So it's like, now we are the media.
Yeah.
We want to correct this injustice in media coverage. Correct. More than actually mourning this girl who was killed. And many people don't care if it was a black man or white man who killed her. It was more like, we want to correct injustice in the media coverage. What do you think is the driving force here? Or is it resentment that the black man killed a white girl? Or was it also, as many say, this is a systematic problem that judges let loose of people from custody who has been doing serial crimes, and that is so lenient against these serial criminals?
Yeah, it's all of the above. It's partly frustration with anti-police and anti-law and order policies that let people out onto the streets after having committed 10 crimes. I mean, the guy that Daniel Penny killed was a similar situation where this guy had punched old ladies in the face. He'd punched old ladies in the face. Like, this is crazy behavior. And yet these people are let back out onto the streets, and then we cry tears when they end up killing somebody, and it's like, there was no shortage of evidence that this guy was a psychopath, and why didn't we lock him away for a long time? Well, often it is because of progressive criminal justice policies, which are just, I think, naive and really harmful. But then there is also a racist element to it. I mean, there's an element on the far right that anytime a black person does anything bad, they want to put it up in Times Square and watch it all day because they don't like black people. And so so there's that element of it too. And then there's also the element of it which is just the true conservative critique of liberal media, that if the races of those two people were reversed, that story would be wall-to-wall coverage in the New York Times and CNN. That's true. We know that that's true. The only reason New York Times and CNN don't care is because the races aren't it's not the race pairing that they're interested in showing. It's not the race pairing that moves them. So all of these things coexist at once. And some of them are valid and some of them are dangerous.
And what do we do so we don't come to a situation where it's more hate towards black or minorities? That's been discrimination against the whites, and that typical oppressor group in this power analysis: white, male, straight, Christian man who is the one who is privileged, and so we can discriminate against them. How do we don't come to a situation where it becomes the opposite? It's the people, now they have oppressed us, now we're going to give back, that vengeance attitude.
Well, I think, for one thing, I think the left can abandon identity politics as a program. I think we should understand the result of the past 10 years as a repudiation of identity politics. Most of the policies were never that popular to begin with, even among the Democratic base. That's why when affirmative action was struck down by the Supreme Court, you didn't see mass protests in America. It's a policy that affects like 1% of black people. The other 99% are totally unaffected by affirmative action in college admissions. It's a policy for elites. But it did create a lot of resentment, and so I think, for one thing, we can basically stop discriminating against white people in the name of racial justice and balancing the scales of history. And we can understand that no group of people can really be expected to agree to discrimination against itself. It just goes against human nature to accept that. And that would be a very good start, because that would take away a lot of the reason for backlash. And then secondly, if we really deal with crime seriously and take psychopaths off the street, regardless of their skin color, then there will be fewer events like this for people to rally around, and there will be less reason to push the image of black criminality if it's less of a problem, because the actual criminals, which are a small minority of black people, are in jail and not threatening anyone. Like the ones that actually are behind bars, that should be behind bars because they're violent, are behind bars. So, I mean, it's everything that the left has done sort of in the name of anti-racism and helping black people has ironically given birth to more racism on the right. So those are the two things I would say.
Where are we today? I mean, these two words that's been hanging around a lot, and that's the word equality versus equity. And equity is very much based on statistics. How much do you have representation in the university or wherever? Equality is more on everybody's same chance. This equity thing has been growing a lot the last decade. And the election that was now lately, 2024, was like a reaction. That's how I analyze it. It was a reaction, a backlash against the wokeness. Where are we today? Do you see any change after the election in America? Some people maybe were Democrats and they voted on Trump, not because they like Trump, but because they dislike wokeness. Is it still a strong force with the equity thinking, or is equality becoming more popular after the election?
So I think American politics has a pattern over the past few years where liberals control most of the actual institutions, meaning your local museum is controlled mostly by Democrats, your local public school is staffed mostly by Democrats on average, your local college or university is disproportionately staffed by Democrats, and therefore all of the institutions tend towards the left. And obviously conservatives don't like that. And then when conservatives get in power, they pass a million executive orders and laws trying to push the culture by force back to the right. The problem is personnel is policy, right? Meaning Trump can scream and yell on Twitter all he wants, and he can call people stupid, idiot radical leftists, and he can pass executive orders saying this needs to happen. The Smithsonian needs to get less woke. But if everyone who works at the Smithsonian, who he can't fire, disagrees, then that's basically not going to happen. Or there will be some kind of, they'll throw him a bone in a superficial way, and then the second he's out of office, they'll go back to what they want their institutional culture to be, which is left-leaning, which they just view as being correct. But of course, that's the nature of political ideology. So at some level, yeah, I think Trump, is it that he's moving the culture away from diversity, equity, inclusion? A little bit, yeah, I mean, to an extent, but the truth is most of the institutions where these things are pervasive are beyond his ability to influence in any serious way. I mean, for instance, the colleges aren't even complying with the affirmative action. There's been now multiple hacks and leaks of admissions data from, I think, NYU and Columbia, which show that they're not complying with the affirmative action ban that the Supreme Court handed down in 2023. And it's like, I guess they'll get sued, but the truth is that norms swamp policy, meaning you can pass all the laws you want, but people don't follow them because no one at the institution agrees, or 90% of people don't agree. Then the American system of checks and balances that prevents despotism means that Republicans can't just change the culture by force. They can't purge people. So most of this stuff is still around, even though it's lost a lot of steam. There aren't people being canceled for making jokes like there were 5 years ago, right? Or being fired for making an OK symbol, which is apparently a white supremacist thing, even though every American does it to say OK. So this was the stuff that was happening that I think is not happening anymore. That phase of cancel culture is over, but is your local public school teacher still teaching that, whiteness is evil? Quite possibly, and there's very little Republicans can do about that.
But you have different spheres of power in a society. You have, as you say, the people who works in the public sphere, and as you say, probably people who leaning left work there because they feel more for it, for a big state, and those kind of work where you can change the world. You can be a world improver, maybe. And then you have the commercial work, which seems to just observe where the wind is blowing. So it seems like you have less woke among the companies and their marketing. And maybe the vote last year was a signal that people is tired of woke. So there's some kind of, as you say, the steam in the woke train is becoming less powerful. do you see anything in the public sphere, like you say, libraries or schools? There is some kind of reaction against this, or will it just continue like this? I'm also thinking about, I mean, like the university and so on. You have a paradigm. You have this postmodern paradigm, which is built very much on the power analysis, the privileged, underprivileged, the slave master relationship. You have the Hegelian dialectics that, you know, the antithesis is moving the thesis, the current state right now, the progress coming out of the people who are more revolutionary in their approach. So can you really change these things at the university, in the public sphere, which is so much influenced by universities, when you have a postmodern paradigm taught in the humanities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, so obviously Trump has tried everything he can to pressure universities to change their policies, including policies that, you know, legally I'm not even sure he has a good grounds to challenge. But at the end of the day, it's like a professor at Barnard is still going to teach that gender is not real. Like, they're still teaching that at Barnard, right? And many other colleges. I don't mean to single out Barnard, but it's just a place I know pretty well. So yeah, Republicans just can't do much about that. And that goes to my previous point. You know, the Republicans have been trying to beat back what is at bottom a cultural wave, and I don't fault them for wanting to beat that cultural wave back, because I agree with them. The cultural turn towards postmodernism and wokeness is toxic, but I'm not sure about the efficacy of trying to beat it with the law.
Mm. But do you see any kind of counter movement? I mean, you had like Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA was kind of counter movement at the universities. Mm-hmm. I read this morning on X that, let me see, it was a few days ago, it was like 64,000 chapters they wanted to start now register, and now I think it was up to 120,000 chapters they want to register. That's a kind of grassroots movement that want to see a new kind of revolution or a reformation of the universities. Do you think that is the right way to go for the conservatives or the anti-woke people? More on debates and trying to break this dominance of the postmodern paradigm? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, what Charlie Kirk accomplished, you know, regardless of whether or not you agree or disagree with every one of his beliefs, and I don't agree with everything, but he accomplished quite a bit in terms of mobilizing young people and meeting, going into the belly of the beast, which are college campuses, and actually having exchanges with people that are indoctrinated on all this stuff. And absolutely, there's got to be more of that.
You're in Europe right now. I don't know how much you know about what's happening in Europe at university and so on, but we are much importing these critical race theories, queer theories, everything that is born in these quite liberal universities in America. Especially when it comes to critical race theory, we have completely different situation. We haven't had slaves in Europe since the early Middle Ages. Slave comes from Slav, which is the Slavic people, so we had white slaves. But we have people of color coming to Sweden. They have not been discriminated by the law. They come here for work. They come here as refugees. They come here as economic migrants. they get access to the welfare system. What do you think about that Europe is importing these kind of ideologies that drive a wedge between people, and we have a complete another context than you have, where actually the black people were treated in a very discriminatory way?
Yeah, I mean, Europe has a serious problem because the kind of migration that America has gotten from Central America, from Mexico and Honduras and Guatemala, all these places, are mostly migrants that come to America to work, accept American rule of law and American culture. Their kids are bilingual. Their grandkids probably don't even speak Spanish, really. I'm half Puerto Rican myself. I barely speak Spanish. And definitely are not trying to set up separate communities with their own religion, with their own way of life, sort of outside the sphere of the state. Not trying to compete with the state for the rule of law, stuff like that. So obviously we have, within that population, there's an isolated problem of criminal gangs, like literally drug cartels. But they're cleanly separated pretty much from the mass of economic migrants that basically come to America and mostly do manual labor jobs and contribute to the economy. And so that's quite a different problem than what Europe has been facing, because the migrant crisis in Europe has brought migrants from parts of the world bringing religious values that in some cases are just incompatible with the rule of law. If you come from a place which says that Islam should be the rule of the land and that Sharia law should take precedence over man-made law, and you import people from that society so quickly in such numbers, and also rather than families, you're importing like lots of young men unattached, which is always a problem with immigration when it's only young men, or mostly young men, and you import them too fast for them to actually assimilate to the culture, then this is a very serious problem, and one that I don't have the answers for. But it's and then on top of that, you have the EU structure, which prevents any country inside of it from actually controlling its borders. So even if any EU member wanted to really get serious about changing its immigration policy, you couldn't do that to some extent, right? And then even countries that leave the EU, like Britain, still somehow don't reduce immigration. So it's a problem, huge problem, that Europe has found it thus far impossible to fix, aside from some countries, I think, some of the Eastern European countries. But it's a very tough situation, and I don't have the answers, but I see that it's a much bigger problem in Europe than it is in America.
But what do you say about that? The question was that we import the thought frame that you have in America concerning systematic racism, identity politics, because we just take it right straight from the way you talk about it into Europe, but we have a completely different history. We have been very monoculture, monoethnical. The people have come here to work, as some are particularly refugees, some are economic migrants. We have the problem that you just mentioned here, but we use the exact same language in a complete different context, and it has really getting rooted into the universities, into the radical left groups, and even into the mainstream parties who has also embraced these thoughts. And we are fueling the same kind of tribalism that you have been fighting with in America. What is your comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, so in one way you could say you understand how the American state might owe some debt to African Americans for slavery and Jim Crow. But how is that analogous to a country accepting new migrants that are benefiting from moving there, and in a situation where Sweden has never done anything bad to those migrants?
And the opposite, I mean, they get access to the welfare state without have ever paid taxes, and they get full access to everything. So it's not only that they have not been discriminated against, but they also benefit without contributing from the day one they come. Then of course most of them work, but there's a completely different approach to them, but still we are using the same language that we import from the critical race theory here in Europe.
Right. So yeah, it is puzzling, because at minimum you can see, even though I disagree with the stuff even in America, you can see how it came about, right? It came out of a particular history. And so it is very strange to transplant that to a society that doesn't have that history, a society where you have basically a host country and a migrant population, as opposed to America, where African Americans were brought against their will and made to work for a couple hundred years, and then suffered another 100 years of not being able to vote and participate in civic life. So there is a psychological justification for all this stuff in America, even if I disagree with it, which I do. There's a story to tell about how we got there that doesn't really make much sense, and when you translate it to Europe.
I mean, we are part of the same cultural sphere on both sides of the Atlantic, Europe and USA, and especially after World War II, with the Marshall Plan, with the help of the American soldiers to defeat the Nazis, with the American culture being the winning force after World War II, 50s and 60s. We became very Americanized. So there's a lot of things that happens in tandem over the pond. I just want you to try to explain, if you can, the grifting on the left side. In America, the Democratic Party. In Europe, we have our Social Democrats and their allies. How they have been earlier focusing on socioeconomic factors. Their main point have been improving workers' rights, all kind of, help to weak groups financially. How they embraced this whole woke idea and became very radicalized. How did this happen? Was it just, as you said in the beginning, it was this social media phenomenon that just got hold of the whole society and they grifted with it because they could benefit from it? Or is there other factors as well that have made here in Europe the left or center left so radical on questions that for 50 years ago it was completely it was uncommon among them. They were strange, these kind of ideas. That was the most fringe radical people. Now it's mainstream among them, and the same with the Democratic Party. Can you explain how this happened? What is their benefit of this shape-shifting among the left side of the political aisle?
Yeah, so one aspect of it is that elites, Democratic elites in America increasingly began to live in a bubble apart from the rest of the country. America has segregated by class and by politics to some extent over the last several decades, to the point where if you're what we often call a coastal elite, it's like you're from LA or you're from New York or a couple other cities, you can't really tell those people apart. Like, you couldn't tell whether I was from New York or LA. I happen to be from the New York area, but if I were from LA, I would talk the same, I would watch the same movies, I would know the same books, pretty much. And that set of people which leans heavily Democrat and goes to Ivy League schools and all the rest, and ends up in the political class or at corporations. That group of people basically lives in a bubble very disconnected from the rest of the country. And there are many markers of this. Charles Murray's book, Coming Apart, is the best book on this. He has a quiz there of a bunch of questions like, do you watch NASCAR? Do you smoke cigarettes? Do you have a tattoo? All these things that separate the elite from the masses. And elites in the Democratic Party have basically lived in a bubble where they began using certain words and engaging in certain ideas that made sense to their small subculture of, anywhere from 1% to 5% of the country or something. And they thought that the rest of the country was sort of with them. So for instance, you saw Democrats start to use the word Latinx to refer to Hispanics. The typical words for Spanish-speaking, people from Spanish-speaking countries in America, we say Hispanic, or you say Latino, Latina. Because the Spanish language is gendered. Every single noun is either a male noun or a female noun. Latinx is like something that was invented by some crazy person that...
Non-binary word.
Yeah, it doesn't exist in the Spanish language, and even the sound of ending with NX does not exist in Spanish phonetically. So it doesn't even obey the rules of Spanish pronunciation, which is pretty strict. Anyway, it got to the point where Elizabeth Warren, who is a major presidential contender, and probably will be again, was using the word Latinx in her speeches. She says, we have to reach out to the Latinx community. And I'm not even, Joe Biden may even have used it. I should double check on that. But when Pew finally did a study about this word, they found out that the percent of American Hispanics that even knew about it was like only like 10 or like 20 or 30%. The percent of Hispanics who liked the term Latinx was like 4%. In other words, 96% of American Hispanics either didn't know about it or didn't like it. And so how could it be possible that you have someone running for president that uses this word that was invented like 2 years ago that nobody even has heard of, much less likes? Well, you can only do that if you're living in a very small bubble with a very unique subculture that the rest of the country sees on TV but like doesn't understand. It's like as if the Amish were like controlling society. It's like a very, and so I think Democrats have been very slow to learn this. And even if they know it in the abstract, it's hard to fix because each individual Democrat's incentive is to rise in the status game of their little world. And the way...
There is a currency to speak like this.
Correct. So if each person follows their own self-interest, well, my self-interest is to play this little weird game.
Because the system awards them to do it.
Correct. But the net result is that the Democratic Party used to be the party of the working class. The Democratic Party in America would be called the Labor Party in any European country. It's our Labor Party. That's what it was. And the Republican Party was the party of business for all, like basically all of American history until very recently. They've switched. The majority of non-college educated now vote Republican. The Republican Party is even, each election of the past three has gotten a higher and higher share of the black vote and the Hispanic vote. And it used to be that, you know, even in my own lifetime when, you know, like Romney was running against Obama, Democrats could honestly say, well, this is the business party that wants to cut taxes for the rich and they only care about corporations and Wall Street, and we're the party of the working class. We care about unions. We care about the little guy. And then all the little guys started voting Republican. Why is that? And now the Democrats, if they win elections, it's only because they win white college-educated voters. It's because those voters, they win over those voters relative to the last election. That's why Biden won. Trump actually increased his share of the black and Hispanic vote, but Biden was able to offset that by getting more white college-educated voters. So, you know, the Democrats have a big problem and a very tough one to fix, and we'll see if they're able to fix it by the next election.
Well, thank you so much, Coleman, that you gave time to come to Hotspot. It was an honor to have you here. And good luck also with the time at the book fair in Göteborg. And we are happy that your book is translated to Swedish. I'm going to read it.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope people enjoy the book.
Thank you. And thank you who have been listening to Hotspot, this program. Please share it on social media, and welcome back with a new program next week. Thank you.